I think everyone is here, and I'm guessing everyone can hear me. I'm
Yes.
not sure if we're still waiting for anyone. We can wait like 2 minutes in case anyone else is coming. Okay, I guess we can start now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني نور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. So if you remember last time, we had started the ahkam related to the workplace, and we from last week we discussed we started by discussing the importance of fiqh, and why is it that we tend to be so pedantic about fiqh and the rulings. Um, and then we discussed some rulings related to Salah, some rulings related to Tahara, especially with regards to uh, scenarios that come up when using public bathrooms, and as well as when clothes become najis, how to purify them. Um, yeah, and then uh, we were supposed to start. We finished some rulings about food and things that you can eat, things you can't eat, what to do during doubt. Um, so continuing from there, this week we want to start by looking at gender interactions, and this is usually an area that's obviously, every time you go to work, you face this, you face people of the opposite gender. So the question is, what are the limits of Sharia in this area? Um, and in gender interactions, we will discuss different things from starting with, for example, dressing. So what are the limits of the Sharia in terms of what men are allowed to wear, what women are allowed to wear? We'll try and cover different aspects of that. And then in terms of gazing at each other, what are the limits of the gazes in terms of physical interaction, in terms of talking, what are the limits of that as well? So inshallah, that's what we shall be looking at. So to begin with, inshallah, we'll first look at men's clothing and what men are allowed to wear, or what men are and what men are not allowed to wear. Um, so before I begin, all all that's going to be discussed today in this section, um, in terms of English, you can find lots of it mentioned in a code of conduct for Muslims living in the West. I highly recommend that if you don't already have it, then you attempt to get this book. Um, and there are more details available in Sayyid Sistani's Farsi Risala called Tawzi al-Masail Jami'. So a lot of what I mentioned will be taken from there in volume 4, and some things will be taken from volume 2. So just if somebody wants to like recheck this, they are able to do so. So starting with men's clothing, the first thing is that um, in terms of what body parts that a man must cover, uh, for a man, it's only wajib that he covers his private parts. I'm talking about in general, for example, the primary ruling is that a man must cover his private parts. Um, so obviously, like this seems the most obvious thing, but the area where this does come into play sometimes is, especially in Western countries, is that when you go to like gyms or for example, places where they play sports. Um, what's very commonly seen over there is that in the dressing rooms where they have the showers, now men and women are separate, but in each of them, generally what's seen is that in the showers, they don't really have like curtains or separations. And so it's fairly common to see that men, for example, in the gym, they would shower in those showers um, in front of other men, not wearing any clothes whatsoever. Um, so in that case, that is not allowed. One is not allowed to look at another person's private parts. At the same time, it's wajib for a man to cover his private parts, even from other men. So let alone non-mahram women, but even from the same gender, it is not allowed to expose the private parts. And some of these things that I'm going to mention, it applies to both men and women. So, for example, when it comes to exposing the private parts to the to anyone else other than one's spouse, so the other person, regardless of whether they are opposite gender or same gender, um, it's not allowed. So just as how, for example, for men, it's not allowed to expose their private parts to other men, similarly for women as well, it is not allowed to show the private parts to other women, except in cases of necessity. So, for example, like if it's like a medical issue, that's a different case. But if it's not necessity, then it's not allowed. So, for example, specifically in the case of women, if women, for example, refer to other women for cosmetic procedures, such as, laser hair removal from the private parts, then that's not permissible because that's not a necessity and it involves exposing the private parts. Even though it's to another lady, it's not allowed. So the first part about men's clothing is that you must cover your private parts. Um, yes, okay. So somebody mentioned about last week. Yes, so last week also this came up again when I was discussing about the laws of the washroom, and I said it's wajib to cover the private parts. Yes, so I mentioned this last week as well. It's called the Satrul Awra. Yes, that is correct. Um, so yes, the first aspect of what you must cover, okay, is your private parts. So does that mean, therefore, that if somebody has covered their private parts as a man, other than that, then they can wear anything they want? No, actually, there are other aspects to be considered as well. So Sayyid Sistani, for example, says that, in fact, like all the fuqaha say this, that it is wajib for anyone to maintain their respect in society. And there's some questions asked to him. And so in response, he says that the general principle is that you cannot wear anything that diminishes your respect in society. So, for example, whether now to decide like the specifics of this, like every person has to decide within their own context. So somebody asked him about specific like colors and models, and he said, look, the principle is this, that you cannot wear anything that diminishes your respect and reputation in society. Now, if it's some, let's say, very fancy model of clothing or very bright colors, for example, that were you to wear it, let's say people would laugh at you or they would think, okay, this is very weird. So even that would not be allowed because the principle is that you have to maintain your respect and reputation in society. Similarly, he was asked, for example, about wearing like ripped clothing. So it's very common, especially in Western societies, to wear like trousers or jeans that are ripped. So technically, yes, okay. You just have for man, you just have to cover your private parts. But if wearing those like ripped jeans, for example, or ripped trousers, is going to have a negative impact on your image in society and one's respect, then based on that aspect, it would not be allowed to wear such clothing. So that's also something that needs to be taken into consideration. And then the question is, okay, can I wear a short sleeve shirt? Um, so yes, in theory, yes, the short sleeve shirt is fine. But somebody asked the question, okay, what about people, for example, who really, go to the gym, they work out, and they have a lot of muscle, and now they want to wear like really like tight clothing, like a short sleeve shirt that's really tight. Are you allowed to wear that? And the response is that um, if that kind of clothing is such that um, generally speaking, it attracts lustful gaze, regardless of whether it's from the same gender or the opposite gender, then it would not be allowed. You're not allowed to wear that clothing. So any piece of clothing that attracts lustful gaze, generally speaking, um, it would not be allowed to wear. Then there's discussion about wearing clothing that is specific to the opposite gender. So even here he says that it's not allowed for men to wear anything that is specific to women. And likewise, when it comes to women, we'll see the same thing. It's not allowed to wear anything. Women aren't allowed to wear anything that's specific, any kind of clothing that's specific to men. And here also he says that it doesn't matter like how long you're wearing that piece of clothing for. Even if it's, for example, a shopkeeper, let's say a man has a store where he sells like women's clothes. And for whatever reason, for marketing or whatever, just to try on or to show the clothes, for example, the man puts on a women's clothing. It's not allowed. Even if it's just to show, to try on, just for a few minutes, it's not allowed for men to wear women's clothing. Likewise, it's not allowed for women to wear men's clothing. Um, and we mean by specific clothing that if people would see you wearing that, they would say, for example, oh, okay, this person is wearing a woman's clothing, or this lady is wearing a man's clothing. Um, so again, this also differs based on the society that you live in. Um, Nowadays, a lot of what men wear has become unisex in the sense that if a woman was to wear it, people don't look at her and say, "Oh, she's wearing a man's clothing." Um, so if you can imagine, let's say, for example, something as simple as uh, jeans, for example, or like trousers. These aren't seen specifically as one gender things, especially in the West. But the point is that any clothing that you wear, if it's specific to the opposite gender, that people will look at it and say, okay, this is like the other gender's clothes, it would not be allowed to wear it. This one applies again to both men and women. The next thing that's specific to men is that men are not allowed to wear pure silk. Um, so over here, we mean specifically pure silk. If it's artificial silk or it's a natural silk, but it's mixed with other material, then that's fine. But if it's 100% pure silk, then it is not allowed for men to wear that. Uh, if it's a tiny piece of clothing, such as, for example, ties, if it's a tie that's made of pure silk, then specifically that's okay. If it's handkerchief, for example, made of pure silk, that's also fine. But if we mean like large items of clothing that on their own are enough to cover one's private parts, then for men, it is not allowed to wear pure silk. Um, and in fact, if one does wear it, so when it is a sin, and if they do wear it and they pray in it, then the salah is also batil. The next thing is for men, specific to men, is that men are not allowed to wear gold. Um, when it regards to gold, people usually ask about, okay, what about like the different types of gold, white gold, yellow gold. The general principle is that if it's gold, it's not allowed. So whether it's white gold, whether it's yellow gold, doesn't matter. If it's gold, you're not allowed to wear it. If it's another metal like platinum, yes, it's allowed. If it's golden color, so it's a different metal, but it's just colored with gold, then that's fine. Or, for example, gold water that is put around some things, that's also fine. Or if, for example, the gold is just considered as a thin layer on top of the other material, such that the thing itself is not made of gold. It just has a layer of gold on top. Sayyid Sistani says that's also okay. But if it's pure gold on its own, then men are not allowed to wear that. So whether that's like a ring, for example, or a necklace, or even, for example, spectacles. I know some people, for example, they really have this knack of buying these really expensive glasses that are made of literally gold. So for men, it would not be allowed to wear that. And again, salah in it is also problematic. So men are not allowed to wear gold. Then there's a discussion over there about, okay, what about artificial teeth that are made of gold. So over here at Lastani, he says that, okay, if it's one of your back teeth that cannot be seen, then that's fine. But if it's the front teeth, and we're talking about like real gold again, then based on ihtiyat wajib, it would not be allowed. Because again, he says that the front teeth, if you wear gold in your front teeth, that's a kind of ornament. And so that's not allowed. So the point is, any kind of gold ornaments, jewelry kind of thing, is not allowed to wear. But using golden things, that's not an issue. So, for example, some people have like a pen it's made of gold. That is okay. But we're specifically talking about like items that you wear. Um, if you have a gold pen, using it's fine, or keeping in your pocket is fine. We're specifically talking about things that you wear. So for men, gold is not allowed. Then tight clothing. Um, so I referred this previously as well. But because when I was looking at the questions asked to say Sistani, there was another question again asked about tight clothing. Can men really wear like really tight clothing that shows their shape? Usually, again, this comes to people, for example, who work out in the gym. And he said the same principle that if it's something that, generally speaking, would attract lustful gaze from either the same gender or the opposite gender, then it would not be allowed. Leather products, uh, again, leather products on its own, um, there is no problem as such, even if you know that it comes from a non-Muslim country and the leather comes from an animal that's not slaughtered Islamically. So wearing the leather on its own, that itself is not a problem. Usually the issue comes up in Salah, because in Salah you cannot be wearing that. So if it's like outside of Salah, then it's fine. Wherever the leather came from, even if you know that it came from an animal that was not slaughtered Islamically, it's fine to wear that. So a leather belt, for example, or leather shoes, wearing it is not an issue. Just in Salah, you have to be careful that you remove uh, these items, leather items, if you don't give it a probability that it's come from an animal that was slaughtered Islamically. But outside of Salah, leather products itself, it's not an issue. Um, Moving on to women's clothing. Um, so in terms of what women can wear, like I highlighted before, some things are common with men that I had highlighted in the previous slide. Um, Specific to women, well, firstly, is the hijab. In terms of women have to, when they go out, of course, they have to cover their whole body except the face and the hands from the wrist to the tips of their fingers. And in fact, to be certain that they have covered this part, they must cover slightly more. So, for example, if we're saying, okay, you have to cover, you're allowed to show from your wrist to the tips of your fingers. Sistani says you must cover a bit extra above the wrist, just so that you know that you have covered the area properly. Same with the face. Um, so I don't want to like deal too much in that because like I'm sure everyone knows about that. So obviously that's the in terms of covering uh, for women, that's what they have to cover. Specifically about the clothes that they wear, regardless of whether it's a workplace or anywhere else. Number one, the clothes must not be light and see-through, because obviously then it's not following the issue of hijab, where we said you have to cover apart from your face and your hands. Um, so whatever they're using to cover their body, if it's light and it's see-through, then that would not be permissible. So even for example, let's say it's a scarf that's see-through, then it would not be allowed. Uh, Secondly, again, the clothes must not be so tight-fitting that the shape of the body can be seen. Um, so the Sayyid Sistani, when discussing this, he says that one, the clothes again should not be should not be tight fitting, and two as well, the clothes should not have any type of adornment. Um, so one thing that's specific for women is that women are not allowed to show to come in front of non-mahram men with any kind of zina or adornment. Um, so starting with the clothes, this includes any kind of um, shiny kind of adornments that, let's say, clothes have that are meant to attract attention. Or even, for example, the question comes up, can you wear really like bright colored clothings? Again, anything that's considered as an adornment would not be allowed to wear in front of non-mahram. Um, Specifically with adornments, then the discussion comes about like makeup and jewelry. Again, the principle is that anything that is considered as an adornment, it is not allowed for women to wear that in front of non-mahram men. So obviously you have your lipstick and your eyeshadow and all the whole makeup kit. That none of that would be allowed in front of non-mahram. Um, Jewelry as well, or even, for example, artificial eyelashes as well is considered in this as well. Nail polish, again, would not be allowed to wear that in front of non-mahram men. In fact, Ayatollah Sistani says even colored contact lenses are considered a type of adornment. So if a lady is wearing that, she cannot come with that in front of a non-mahram woman, non-mahram men. In fact, any kind of adornment she has, she must cover it. Uh, like I said, even colored contact lenses. Um, Even, for example, if it's like mehndi or henna that women tend to put in their hands. So say, for example, let's say, I don't know, you went to a family, relative's wedding, and you applied mehndi or henna on your hands. If you're going, let's say, to the women's section, okay, that's fine. But okay, the next day you have work, for example, okay, then it would not be allowed to expose your hand in front of a non-mahram man. And so the woman will have to wear gloves. Um, so principle is any type of adornment in front of non-mahram men is not allowed. There are specific exceptions that have been made. These are taken directly from the narrations, where the imams have said that there are certain things that are allowed, that even though they are considered type of adornment, they are allowed to be worn. But this is on the condition that, one, the intention of the woman of these things that I mentioned is not to attract attention, not her attention is not to her intention is not to attract lustful gazes from the opposite gender, and it's not that the case that by wearing this particular item she would generally cause attention from the other gender and lustful gazes, even though her intention might not be. But if she knows that if she wears this, it's generally going to cause some sort of attention and gazes from the opposite gender, and it will cause to like moral corruption, then it would not be aware. But in general circumstances, the exceptions to the rule of adornment is, one, rings, um, two is a necklace or a bracelet, but in this case, she cannot show her skin. Same with the wrist as well. So let's say if she's wearing it on top of her clothing, I don't know, let's say she has like a necklace and she's wearing it on top of her clothing, then that would be fine, assuming the previous conditions are held. These are, and as well as applying kohl in the eyes. Other than this, any type of adornment is not allowed to be worn in front of non-mahram men. Then the next thing that Sayyid Sistani mentioned is that um, behaving in any way that attracts attention and is against the status of a Muslim woman. So interestingly over here, he says that apart from what has been mentioned before, he says as a Muslim woman, there are some things that are expected from her, she should not behave in any way that goes against what is expected of a Muslim woman. And specifically, he gives the example of, let's say, a woman riding a motorcycle or a bicycle. And he says that that is really problematic because it's against this modesty of a Muslim woman to, for example, uh, sit on a motorbike or ride a bicycle in front of other non-mahram men. So, and the way she behaves as well, she should not behave in a way that is attracting attention from the people around her, the non-mahram men around her. So, for example, let's say if, based on what we'll discuss later, let's say she is uh, technically, let's say it's permissible for her to, for example, let's say like scream in public, for example, or let's say she's with her friends and she's laughing really loudly and screaming, and uh, assuming the other principles are holding, then here Sayyid Sistani is saying that again, that itself would also be problematic because uh, behaving in that way generally is attracting the attention from the opposite gender and is against the status of a Muslim woman. In terms of shoes, generally a question that is asked is, are women allowed to wear high heels? And the response that has been given is that, as I said previously, one, if her intention is to attract attention, then that's not allowed. But say she doesn't have that intention, uh, if you're in a society that wearing that, especially with the sounds that it makes, it's going to cause heads to turn, and it's going to attract attention, and it will lead to some kind of moral corruption. If that's generally the case, then it will not be allowed. But if, for example, you live in a society where, that's like the norm, and if a Muslim woman, for example, does wear high heels, it's not that it's going to cause attention. And, for example, it's seen as something very normal. It's not seen out of the ordinary. It does not attract attention. It does not lead to any kind of moral corruption. Then it would be allowed. So again, some of these things, they differ based on the place you are in, and you'd have to see the situation you're in. Like I said, for men as well, it's not allowed for men to wear clothing that's specific to the opposite gender, regardless of what her intention is, whether it's just to try it out, whether it's like for a joke, it's not allowed. So especially like, if you have these kind of like Halloween parties and people have to like dress up in costumes, uh, again, even there, it would not be allowed to wear clothing specific to opposite gender. Um, so I remember one of the istifta'at, somebody was asking at Lesistani, what about like, dressing up for like plays and dramas? Let's say if a woman is taking up a role of a man in a play or a drama or even like on TV. Um, and the answer is even in that, she's not allowed to wear clothing specific to the opposite gender. Similar to the man, he's not allowed to wear clothing specific to women. Doesn't matter whether it's like a play or a drama or for TV or for entertainment purposes, not allowed. So that's just with regards to clothing. I don't see any questions. Okay. Moving on now to rules of gazing at the opposite gender. The reality is that in this area, it's slightly more strict for women than it is for men. Um, but that is the uh, Sharia, and there's not much we can do about it. So I know, like usually, like whenever this is discussed, some women feel that this is like unfair, but there is nothing that can be done about it. So in terms of men looking at non-mahram women, uh, the ruling is slightly different for whether the woman is a practicing Muslim woman. And so by practicing, I specifically mean about practicing with hijab. Um, if the person the man is looking at is a practicing Muslim woman, meaning she's somebody who observes hijab, then in that case, it is not permissible for the man to look at those parts of her that should be covered in her hijab. So like I said, she has to cover everything apart from her face and her hands from the wrist to the fingertips. Um, So other than the face and the hands from the wrist to the fingertips, it is not permissible for a man to look at any other part of her body, regardless of what his intentions are. Because again, that's what she has to cover. Um, so regardless of whether he has good intention or whether there's lustful intention, whatever it is, uh, the parts that she has to cover in hijab, it is not allowed for a man to look at that. So say, for example, you're at work and one of your colleagues is a Muslim woman who does practice hijab. And say, for example, it's a work meeting and like she raises her hand and let's say her sleeves fall and exposing this part of her hand. So as a man, it is not allowed to look at that, regardless of what your intention is. When it comes to the face and the hands that she's allowed to expose, there as well, the man is allowed to look at that, but with two conditions. Number one, it should not be looking with lust, and two, they should not be fear of falling into sin by looking at the face and the hands. Usually, like when I've discussed this previously with people, when I say like falling into sin, their mind immediately goes on to, okay, so you're saying, okay, if I look at her face, I fear that I'll fall into sin. And by sin here, I mean like adultery. We don't mean adultery only. In fact, adultery is the most like extreme. We mean any sin, even if that may be looking at her with a lustful gaze. So, for example, if I know that, okay, let's say I've seen her face, and now I know that if I continue looking, so right now I'm fine, I don't have a lustful gaze, I'm not looking with lust, but I fear that if I continue looking at her, this will lead me to looking with a lustful gaze, then that's not allowed. Because the second condition that we said, it's only permissible to look at the face and the exposed hands if there is no fear of falling into sin. But if one genuinely has a fear that I will fall into sin, be that, for example, looking with lust, or, for example, touching, or any other sin that you can think of, it would not be allowed. So that's with regards to a practicing Muslim woman. Then comes the issue of, okay, what about either non-practicing Muslim women, and by non-practicing we mean specifically about hijab. So women, for example, who don't care about the hijab, they don't observe hijab, and non-Muslim women. So for these kind of women, there's a bit more leniency in the sense that for them, it is permissible to look at those parts of their bodies that they generally expose. And by that we mean, for example, that in society, we're not talking about like specific places like the beach, for example, what they wear over there. We're saying like generally in society, what is it that these kind of women generally expose? So, for example, it's very common, let's say, to see women, uh, non-Muslim women, who wear like who expose, for example, this part of their hands below the elbow. It's very common, for example. Um, so those parts that they generally expose normally in society, it is permissible for a man to look at those parts. But again, even over here, with the condition that one, the gaze should not be with lust, and two, they should not be a fear of falling into sin, any sin. We're not specifically talking about adultery, that's the most extreme. Any kind of sin, they should not be a fear of falling into sin by looking at those parts. Coming on to the duty of women who are looking at non-mahram men. Um, Here, it's slightly more strict in that it is only permissible for a woman to look at those aspects of the body of a non-mahram man that were specifically uh, exposed in society in general during the time of the prophets and the imams. So Ayat al-Sistani says that this is the criteria, and he says specifically, so she can look at the face, the neck, the arms until just above the elbow. So for example, let's say if he's wearing a short sleeve shirt, that would be fine. She can look at this aspect of the arm. But if he's wearing like sleeveless shirt, then looking at the biceps area, for example, is not allowed. In terms of the knees, in terms of the feet, up to the knees, it's fine. She can look at that. But anything above the knees, so let's say if he's wearing really short shorts, that would be problematic. So the other areas, now let's say, for example, the chest or the stomach is not allowed for her to look. The reason why this is slightly more difficult for women is because of this, that even if she looks at these areas without lust and fear of falling into sin. So let's say, for example, uh, you know, a woman goes to watch a football or a hockey match, for example. Well, it's not so common in hockey, but let's say football, and the person scores a goal and he removes his shirt. Um, so in that scenario, it is not permissible for her to look at the chest of this non-mahram man, even if she doesn't have lust and even if she doesn't have a fear of falling into sin. Um, and therefore, it becomes problematic for her to watch sports such as like wrestling, where these parts are normally exposed. So for women, there's no distinction between the Muslim man and the non-Muslim man. It's the same principle for all, is that she is generally allowed to look at those faces, those aspects of the body that were generally uncovered during the times of the Prophet and Imams. But even these aspects that are okay to look at, such as the face, the neck, the arms until the elbow, and the feet and the knees, even that, uh, it's based on the condition that it's not with the lustful gaze. Um, in the sense that if even these things that she's allowed to look, let's say like the face, for example, she's not allowed to look at that with lustful gaze or if there's a fear of falling into sin, obviously. And in that sense, both men and women have the same duty. Any kind of gaze to whatever body part, if it's accompanied with lust or with a fear of falling into sin, it's not allowed. Um, I hope that's clear. Okay. The other aspect that comes then is about physical interaction. So obviously, I'm sure you all know that it is not allowed to make contact with the opposite gender. So a man cannot touch a non-mahram lady. Similarly, a lady cannot touch a non-mahram man. And so therefore, shaking hands with the opposite gender is definitely not allowed. Um, and I know usually like in workplaces, this is usually an issue because it's very common, especially in Western societies, to shake hands. But the answer is that it would not be allowed to shake hands with the opposite gender if it's skin to skin. Like if you really need to shake hands, then it's fine. Like you can like wear gloves, and with gloves it's fine. So what we're talking about over here is direct skin to skin contact is not allowed with the opposite gender. In fact, if one knows that this situation where shaking hands with the opposite gender will come up, and they know that they cannot say no at that time, uh, then it's not even allowed to voluntarily put oneself in that situation. So, say for example, there is a after work gathering, which is not really like necessary for you to attend, and you know that if I go to such a gathering, definitely there will be a scenario where I will have to shake hands with the opposite gender, and I'm not the kind of person who can refuse. Either I feel shy or I feel embarrassed for whatever reason. Um, then going to that uh, uh, meeting is also not allowed because um, you know that haram act will take place over there, and you know that you won't be able to stop yourself. So Sayyid Sistani says specifically says that even then going to such a meeting is not allowed. Um, but okay, if you want to go, then you need to be strict with how you behave. And so if the opportunity does come up to shake hands with the opposite gender, then you can politely refuse. Moving on now to the aspects of speaking with the opposite gender. This again is something that's very common and especially in workplace surroundings, it's very common that you have to speak with your colleagues, and this is also an area where the lines get unfortunately blurred, especially if your colleague is from the opposite gender that you're seeing every day, and then people lose that boundary and they become friendly, and they start really like crossing the line. And so, for example, now it becomes like a normal, for example, to joke with them, to laugh with them. And so, therefore, it's important that we have our boundaries clear from the start. When it comes to speaking with the opposite gender, uh, in principle, it is allowed to speak with the opposite gender, but there are some things that must be maintained. So if any of these conditions are not met, then it would not be allowed to speak with the opposite gender. Number one, obviously, it should not be with the lustful intentions. If there is lustful intentions involved, then it should not be allowed. Number two, there should be no fear of falling into sin. Again, like I said before, sin over here does not specifically mean adultery. It means any sin. So again, let's say if I know, okay, I have a work colleague, um, uh, opposite gender, and I genuinely fear that, okay, if I continue speaking with her, then it's going to lead to something more, even if that may be leading to me looking at her with a lustful intention, which is a sin. So even if just to that aspect, then no, I should not be speaking to her. Um, so again, there shouldn't be lust. There shouldn't be a fear of falling into sin. In terms of the content that's being spoken with the opposite gender, again, there should be no inappropriate content, obviously. Specifically for women, it's not allowed for her to alter her voice by making it, like, for example, more thin, such that it's generally considered to be attractive. Um, and lastly, somebody, again, there was a question that was asked to Atlas Study that, okay, can I make a joke with somebody of the opposite gender if um, I don't have a falling into sin? So let's say it's a workplace colleague. I know, okay, nothing's going to happen and there is no lustful intention, but just under the presumption of being friendly, and I'm starting to make jokes with the opposite gender. Can I make a joke? And even if the other conditions are met, he says that you should not, again, act in a way or do something that is not expected of a religious person. Um, so basically, what that means is that society generally has an understanding that, okay, as a religious person, uh, you would not be joking around with a non-mahram, even if there is no lust involved, even if there is no inappropriate content, even if there's no fear of falling into sin. But because the expectation of a religious person is that they are not joking around with somebody of the opposite gender, then you have to maintain that status of yours as a religious person. And so you cannot be joking with the opposite gender. Um, Generally speaking, what's been noticed though in the workplace is that people who don't maintain like these boundaries and they become lax, uh, in the long term, it leads to other sins. Um, Again, not specifically talking about like adultery, that's like the most extreme. But uh, any of these things can occur. Like you start by being friendly and joking and speaking about things that are really not like necessary. Um, so at one point it's like talking about like work-related stuff, that's like understandable. But then now you start becoming friendly, and now you're asking them, for example, okay, how was your dinner and what did you do? And the more you start becoming friendly and you start losing these barriers, um, eventually, more so, it seems that it does end up leading to haram. So I think it's always better to always keep it at a minimum. So even though something is allowed, like these conditions are fulfilled, generally speaking, practically is that it's always better to keep at a minimum. So that finishes up the section on speaking with the interaction with the opposite gender. I'm not sure if there are any questions about anything related to that. Any questions? Uh, by the way, if you have a question, either you can send it in the chat or you are free to unmute and use the mic. How about as a doctor? Uh, okay, so the ahkam of a doctor in some of these areas would be exceptions. So, for example, as a doctor, you have to touch the opposite gender. Yeah. So again, if it's something that's really necessary, um, uh, and you cannot do it through gloves, for example, then out of necessity, it would be allowed. But if there is a way around it, such as touching over the clothes or using gloves, then you cannot directly touch. The ahkam of doctors is a bit more, it's got a lot more to it, both for the doctor and as well as those who are seeing the doctor. I didn't bring all of that over here because I think that needs a separate session on its own in terms of what you can expose to the doctor of the opposite gender, when you can go to the doctor of the opposite gender. So that would need a whole session on its own. But yes, if it's necessary for the doctor and there's no other option, and helping the patient, curing the patient is dependent on that, then that would be fine. Okay, I don't think there's any other questions. So now we move on to the discussion about financial matters. And the first thing that we want to discuss is khums. I'm sure there's going to be like lots of questions about khums that people have. It's one of those areas that people always have questions about. But the idea is not over here to go through all the rulings on khums. Um, I'm specifically looking at those areas of homes that is relevant to the working class. And so um, I will not be touching on other areas that I'm sure that people would have questions on, specifically looking at those rulings that are much more related to the workplace. So with regards to homes, as a principle, it should be understood that any income that a person gains, um, as soon as they gain that income, whether that's be like, for example, their salary, it's a gift, they sold something, any kind of gain that a person gets, technically speaking, as soon as they get that gain, that benefit, that income, khums is wajib immediately. So principally speaking, uh, as soon as you get it, khums is wajib over there. In fact, if you look at the verse of khums, uh, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا غَنِمْتُم مِّن شَيْءٍ فَأَنَّ لِلَّهِ خُمُسَهُ. It says, as soon as you gain anything, khums is wajib upon it. And then you must be wondering, okay, if khums is wajib immediately, then how come we have this talk about, okay, wait for a year, if you don't use it in your expenses, then give khums? So here we have narrations from the Prophet and the Imams saying that yes, technically khums is wajib immediately as soon as you gain it, but out of kindness to their Shia and to help them, the Prophet and the Imams have said that we allow you that okay, you can take this gain, this income that you have, take it, okay, use it for your personal expenses for you and your family. If after a year uh, you still have anything remaining, then give the khums. But principally speaking, the khums applied on the thing as soon as you got it. So with regards to khums, something that's specific to the working class is how do I identify my khums year? So I mentioned that the what the narration says is that okay, as soon as you gain it, as soon as you whether that's a gift or your salary or any kind of income, as soon as you gain it, okay, khums is applicable on it. But the imams are saying, okay, go use it for your expenses, for your family's expenses, and if after a year you still have anything remaining, then you pay khums on whatever is remaining. So the question comes, okay, how do I calculate this year? Is it that every income, every gain that I have has its own year? Do I have to pick a date? Um, so specifically for Al-Lasistani, he says, look, there are two kinds of people. First person is a person who does not have a job or a continuous source of income. So say, for example, a student or a housewife who's not working. um, or somebody who's retired. So people who don't have a job, not a job or a continuous source of income. And by that I mean, for example, it's not that they had some money which they have invested somewhere and are constantly gaining from that investment. So say, for example, people who have invested in property and are continuously gaining rent from their property. Um, we're not talking about those. The first group is such people who don't have a job and who don't have a continuous source of income. For them, they can choose a date of their own. Um, so, for example, they can say, okay, let's say as a student who doesn't have a job or a housewife, for example, they can say, okay, my home state will be, I don't know, like 15th of January, for example. So they have an option. Either they can choose a date of their own. So they can choose that date and say, okay, on this date, um, I will calculate my homes in the sense that any of my incomes or gifts or anything that I had gained that have not been used for my expenses, every year on that specific date, I will pay my homes. So they are the ones who can choose a date of their own, uh, or they have the flexibility in that they can decide to keep a separate date for each income. Um, so say, for example, they received a gift on 5th of January. They can say, okay, for uh, this gift, the year for this will be 5th January. So a year from when they got each income. Um, say, for example, they got a gift on 5th January, a gift on 10th January, a gift on 20th January. So they can decide that I'm going to, for each of them, I'll keep a separate year. So 1 year from the date that I got them, they can do that as well. Um, but usually what happens is that if you start keeping a separate date for each income, what in Arabic is called لكل ربح سنة, each year for each income or each gain, usually it becomes a bit tedious to try and like maintain and to keep a note of uh, what are the dates for each thing. So what they can do is that they can um, use the first and the second method combined. So they can say that, okay, you know what, I'm going to keep a home state. Um, I'll choose one date for my own. Um, and then for some gifts, for example, I will mark them for their years. So I will not, for each income, I won't keep a separate year, only for some of them. But for the others, I will calculate them on my date. So they can decide to keep a mix of the two. So that that person is a person who doesn't have a job, a continuous source of income. So for them, that's how they identify the start of their year. That's not who we want to focus on today. Um, since the course is about ahkam related to the workplace and the working class, the second type of people are those who have a job or they have a continuous source of income, such as they have some capital which they have invested, um, and now they're gaining the returns. So, a typical example is somebody who doesn't have a job, but he has a property which he's constantly getting rent from. So, a person who has a job, uh, then his khums year starts on the day he first started working. Uh, so let's say, for example, I started working my current job, let's say, I don't know, 1st of January. So automatically, my khums year is going to be, my khums date is going to be on 1st January. Uh, and so for people who have a job, it's not that they can choose any date of their own. Their homes year is always going to be on the first day that they started working. So within like the Maraji, there's a difference of opinion about like when exactly is it? Is it the day that you first start working? Is it the day that you get the job? Is it the day you get your salary? But specifically right now for Ayatollah Sistani, he says that the day the person first starts working. In fact, he says even further than that, um, you can even specify the time of when you started working. So say, for example, you started working at 8 a.m. on 1st January. So what that means is that next year, 1st of January at 8 a.m. is your the end of your khums year. And at that point, you would see whatever I've gained throughout the year any kind of income, whether that's my salary, that's kind of like additional bonuses, whether that's kind of gifts, all of that combined, minus anything that I've used as an expense that I've spent on myself and my family, halal expenses, minus that, whatever is remaining, I would have to pay khums on it. The reason why he specifically says about, okay, see like what hour did you start working, is that, okay, so firstly, based on this, this person cannot keep a separate year for each income. So what that means is that, okay, if I started working on the 1st of January, so like I said, okay, my home state will be the 1st of January. So that means even if like one day before, let's say, I don't know, 30th December, for example, or 31st December, I received a gift just one day previously, or even, for example, like my salary, my paycheck, I got it on 31st December. So as a working person, you can't say, okay, because I got this on 31st December, I'll keep this as a separate account and this has its own year. No, that's specifically to the person who doesn't have a job. For the person who has a job, their home state is fixed on the day that they started working. So even if you got something on 31st December, by tomorrow, which is 1st January, whatever from this amount you have not used as an expense for you or your family, then homes would be eligible on it. So based on that, then some people ask, okay, what about something that I received on the 1st of January? Let's say I received a gift on the 1st of January. Will I calculate this based on, is this an income for my previous year or for the next year? The answer again is where the timing comes into play. You started work on, let's say, 8 a.m. And so your date is 1st of January, 8 a.m. So if you got this gift or this bonus or this income, whatever it is, if you got it on the 1st of January after 8 a.m., let's say in the evening, for example, somebody gave you a gift, then that gift, okay, you have a year until next year, 1st of January, 8 a.m. But if you received it in the morning, say for example, 6 a.m., somebody gave you a gift, then your home state is 8 a.m., so you have 2 hours. If in that 2 hours you use it in your expenses, you spend it on yourself or on your family for a halal reason, then it's fine. But if you don't and it remains with you, then you have to pay khums on that. So that's why the timing then becomes important for things that you specifically gain on the date of your homes. Then comes the issue of, okay, a person who has multiple forms of income. Say, for example, okay, I work in the evening, I'm sorry, I have a job, and in the evening I do a side job as well, or I have, for example, my own side income. I have, let's say, I don't know, some side business, for example. So basically, I have multiple forms of income. I have multiple jobs. So in that case, if each job is different from the other and they have a different income and expenses, so their accounts are completely separate, then what this person can do is that he can set up multiple dates for each of his jobs. So say, for example, okay, I started working my day job, for example, okay, let's say 1st of January. And then let's say in March, for example, I started a part-time job, let's say in the evenings, I don't know, Uber Eats, for example. So I started, let's say, 1st of March doing Uber Eats as a side job in the evening. So now what I can do is that if these accounts are separate, I have one date for 1st of January for my income and expenses related to my day job. And I have another date, 1st of March, for example, which I am taking because of my Uber Eats job, which I started 1st of March at the same time. So my incomes related to that I get from Uber Eats, that specifically I will calculate on the 1st of March. So now I have 2 dates. The gifts or any income that I receive that is not related to my jobs. So for my jobs, let's say I'm getting my salary, my paycheck, and I'm using that to calculate my homes. But any other income that I get that is not related to my jobs. So for example, I'm getting gifts or I sold household item, for example, um, any other income that I get, now I have two dates, right? For the person who had like one date only, for him, okay, it's easy. That one date is fixed for you. You calculate whatever income you got on that date minus your expenses. For the person who now has two dates because they have two jobs, then they these incomes that are not related to any of the jobs, they are free to decide on what date they want to pin it to. So a gift that I got, let's say, for example, uh, in the month of November, or I sold something, I made a profit in the month of November. Now I can choose, do I want to like calculate the khums of this in my January date or on my March date, if something has remained that I've not used for my expenses. Now, the important thing over here to consider is what is the definition of a working person? Um, so who is counted as a working person such that their home's date is the first date that they started working. So Islamic study says that um, the definition of a working person is somebody who has a job um, that gives him enough income to cover a reasonable amount of his expenses for the year. Um, and in so in the example that Sami gives is that, let's say, for example, 25%. Um, so I calculate what are my expenses for the year, rent, food, groceries, whatever. Um, these are all my expenses. And now I look at, okay, I have this job. Doesn't matter whether it's okay, full time, half time, part time, doesn't matter. This job, the amount of money that I am gaining from it, does it cover a reasonable amount of my expenses, such as 25% of my expenses? If it does cover at least 25% of my expenses, then I would be considered as a working person. But if the money that I'm receiving is less than this, so the example, let's say Tisani says, for example, let's say somebody has a job that only gives him 5% of his expenses to cover, then that person is not considered as a working person. And so even though you might have like a job per se, but the income that you're gaining from that job is not 25% or more of your expenses for the year, then that person is not considered as somebody who has a job and his home year starts on the day he first started working. So they would go to the first category and they can choose the date that they want. So the definition of a working person is that their income is enough to cover a good amount of their expenses. The example that's given is specifically 25%, and that's why we're running with it. Let's say if at least 25% of your expenses is covered by your job, your income from your job, then you're counted as a working person. For the rest of your expenses, like you could be receiving support from like the government, you could be receiving support from like family members, loans, that's fine. But if through your job you are earning at least enough to cover 25% of your expenses, then you count as a working person, and your home year starts on the day that you started working. So if that general principle is understood, then the following questions are just application of this principle. What about those who work part-time? So even, for example, let's say students in the summer, they start working, I don't know, like Tim Hortons, for example, or McDonald's. Um, they work, let's say, for like 2 or 3 months in the summer. What happens to them? Or people who work, as they call it, locum. They get a contract here, a contract there. They don't have a full-time job. Um, for all of these people, the criteria is the same. That look, this amount of money that you've gained, or that you will gain, um, is it enough to cover a reasonable amount of your expenses? Going with 25%. As a student, for example, okay, I know that in a year I have these many expenses. Okay, 3 months in the summer I'm working. Um, in these 3 months, am I gaining enough to cover at least 25% of my expenses for the year? If I am, then I would be counted as a working person, and my home year starts on the first day that I started work. If no, my expenses are so many, and the amount that I gain is very little, it's not even 25%, then no, I can choose my own home state. I'm not a working person. Um, then the question comes that, okay, yeah, I have expenses, but these expenses are being taken care of by someone else. So, for example, as a woman, uh, technically it's wajib for the husband to cover her expenses. Um, so, let's say she works part-time. So, will she say that, oh, okay, I don't have any expenses, all my expenses are covered. Am I counted as a working woman? The answer is, Sayyid Sistani says that even for these people, what the woman does as well is that she says, okay, put the husband on the side. Uh, in the case that he was not providing for me and he was not supporting me, in that case, hypothetically, how much would my expenses for the year be? Am I earning at least 25% to cover 25% of those expenses? If yes, then I would be considered as a working person. Doesn't matter whether my income is actually going practically to those expenses. Uh, that's not the criteria. The criteria is that the quantity that I'm earning, is it enough to cover at least 25% of my expenses? Even though practically speaking, say for example, all the income that I'm getting, I don't spend any of it on my expenses. Let's say, for example, either my husband is taking care of it, or let's say, for example, we have a girl who's still living with her parents. Let's say, for example, she's just graduated, or again, same thing in the summer, for example, doing part-time jobs, that kind of thing. So she says, okay, my expenses are being covered by my parents, for example. My dad is paying all my expenses. So I don't have any expenses. No, the criteria is that assume they were not there. Assume, for example, I don't know, I'm not getting like common benefits. Assume my 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 parents are not paying for my expenses or my husband. In that case, if 25% of my expenses are being covered with this income, then I would be considered as a working person, and my home state starts from the date that I first started working. Okay, then the question is, what about somebody who changes jobs? Um, okay, my current job, let's say I started on, let's say again, 1st January. Uh, Mid-year, for example, okay, either I quit or I lost my job, the company closed down, and now, okay, I'm looking for a job, and then I change jobs. Now I start my new job, for example, let's say 1st of November. What do they do? So for them, um, their date, first of all, is still 1st of January. Um, if in the middle of the year, between 1st January, let's say 2023 to 1st January 2024, within the year, uh, let's say they lose their job. So that home year is still continuing until 1st of January. So if within the year they change jobs, then still their home state still sticks at 1st January. But say, for example, okay, they lose their job within the middle of the year and they don't start a new job until after 1st of January. In that case, then their home state changes to the day they started their new job. Uh, so again, just to make it clear, uh, my old job, I started on 1st January. Let's say, for example, let's say I worked there like 5.5 years. Um, in November, for example, okay, I decided to quit. And then I took a holiday and I said, okay, well, I'll come back after like 3 months and then find a new job. So my home state will be until 1st January. And then I started a new job on, for example, 1st of February. Now my home state, because it's that previous year is finished. So for the new year, my home state will now be 1st of February. Similarly, to somebody who retires. So say I was working, okay, again, my home state was 1st of January because that's the day I first started working. But say, for example, okay, I have now retired. What do I do? Again, same principle applies. The year that I retired in, that year, my home state will still remain in January. So say, for example, okay, I retired in November. Um, so my home state is still 1st of January. Come 1st of January, I will do my calculations. Any income that I have minus expenses that I've used for me or for my family, halal expenses, I pay the homes. Okay, now that year is finished, I'm a retired person. Um, okay, I don't have a job. Um, so in that case, okay, I can choose any date that I want. But if, for example, I don't have a job, but I do have a continuous source of income. Say, for example, I have made some investments. I have some properties. So, like I said, people who do have this continuous source of income from investments that they made using their money, that comes in the same group as a person who has a job. So this person would still then remain on 1st January, this retired person, because he has that investment where he's getting rent from, assuming that income that he's getting from his investments, from his properties, is covering at least 25% of his expenses. Um, but if he doesn't have that, then he can choose the date that he wants, because now he's not somebody who has a job or a continuous source of income. Um, so there's like a bit more related to this. I want to discuss some stuff related to pensions, but it seems that for now we are out of time, and this needs a bit more explanation. So I'm going to leave that over here. And if there are any questions, I can answer any of the questions. If not, then we can leave it here. Uh, if a question or two comes to mind, is there a way to get in touch with you? Yeah, so I believe that you do have my email. Uh, if not, it will be forwarded to you. But I did email all the participants. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can email me. That's okay.
Assalamualaikum. Excuse me, I have a question.
If there are
7 year,
no other questions, then
do you hear me?
yeah, thank you very much for listening, and please do keep us in your du'as, inshallah.